So we started with the Mishnah. We're on page 30b, page Lamed Amud Beis 30b, the new parak, the new chapter, chapter 5. And this chapter is a continuation of the previous chapter, talks about prayer and the way a person should pray. So it starts off with telling us that a person should not daven only with kaved rosh, with heaviness of the head, which is the opposite of lightheadedness. This is heavy-headedness. Rashi translates it to mean hachna'ah, which is either reverence or humility. But that is one of the translations. There is another translation that it actually means physically kaved rosh, like a heaviness on your head that you're sort of bending down in order to present oneself as in a way of humility. And some of the commentaries combine the two, that it's both. It's a certain humility, a feeling of humility, a reverence, fear. The Gemara uses the term fear, and the understanding is, how does fear and humility fit together? So, because if you remember yesterday, we mentioned in the Gemara different verses, and they seem to emphasize the concept of fear, and yet the Mishnah used the term kaved rosh. So it either means that if a person has humility, they will be able to have fear of heaven. And so they go hand in hand. You need to have the humility in order to have fear of heaven. Or another way of understanding this combination is that the main point is that a person shouldn't be lightheaded. And so having fear of heaven would be the opposite. Having fear of heaven would be the opposite of lightheadedness, which would be the fulfillment of that a person should not be lightheaded and frivolous during, while they're praying or before their prayer. So we mentioned that the early Hasidim, the Mishnah mentioned that the early Hasidim Harishonim, the early pious people, or those that beautify and are zariz to do mitzvahs, they have alacrity in their fulfillment of mitzvahs. They called the Hasidim Rishonim, the early Hasidim. Could you do that outside? And they would wait 1 hour before they prayed. Now, the commentaries talk about the fact that we don't pray Shemona Esrei right away. We also wait time before we do the Shemona Esrei. We have the early blessings in the morning. We've got the Pesukei de Zimra, the verses from Psalms, Baruch She'amar. We also prepare ourselves before we pray Shemona Esrei with numerous prayers. We say the Shema, we say the blessings of the Shema. So we have all of these prayers. So the commentaries mention that's in a certain sense a fulfillment of this tradition from the Hasidim Rishonim. It's not a full hour, but it's definitely a preparation before we jump into the Shemona Esrei, which the Shemona Esrei is standing before God. You're standing right there before God. The other prayers, we don't consider it. Of course, God is everywhere, and we're always standing before God. But the other prayers are not, we don't have to feel that we're in front of the king. And here, Shemona Esrei, we're right in front of the king. And so we're standing with our feet together, full concentration. And so before that, we prepare ourselves. That preparation that we do is similar to the preparation of the Hasidim Rishonim, that they would wait 1 hour, a full hour, before they prayed in order to have this kavanas halev, sheyachavnu libam. And even sheyachavnu libam, this concept of what they're preparing for, this itself was somewhat of a discussion if it means concentrating that their prayers will have full concentration, or is it that they should purify themselves, have a pure heart so that their prayers will be accepted? And we saw these different commentaries. We mentioned them yesterday, that there are few ideas here, but the concept is that you're getting yourself ready for the prayer. So we also mentioned that according to halacha, straight halacha, the minimal amount of time that a person should prepare themselves is the amount of time it takes to walk 8 tefachim, 8 handbreadths, because there was a Talmudic statement that we learned earlier that a person shouldn't jump right into the Shemona Esrei. They should wait a short time before they do that, and that would be the amount of time of 8 handbreadths, that amount of time. So that is the first statement in the Mishnah. I should also mention that we mentioned yesterday about what did they do during this preparation. One of the commentaries explains that they actually prayed that they would be able to do a good prayer. They prayed that they should be able to say a decent, respectable prayer afterwards. So that's one of the explanations, that they were reciting that this itself was a prayer. And the way they see it in the words is it says the word prayer there, that you don't stand to pray only with kavod reish. It mentions the concept of praying before they would be shoyin sha'achas in the spalalim. Actually, it's on the second line. Let me reword what I just said. It says the Chasidim Rishonim would wait 1 hour and pray in order that they would have the kavanas halev, this concentration to Hashem. So they would wait an hour and pray. The way they want to translate it is, during this hour, they would wait an hour and pray during this hour in order that they should have kavanas halev, they should have this concentration. Otherwise, it should say they would wait an hour in order to have concentration and then pray. Why does it say they would pray first? So this commentary wants to explain, and I heard it from the Chassam Sofer, but I see it's also the Vilna Gaon. They bring it from the Vilna Gaon, and so it seems like a few commentaries mention this explanation, and it's hinted to in the Mishnah. Yes, Susan.
Okay, are you speaking about not just getting in the mood for prayer, but getting your mind clear of all the mundane aspects, and then hoping that you have a good, in other words, that you pray in such a way that you get the attention of Hashem, and then you do the Shemona Esrei. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, purifying your heart, purifying your mind, getting rid of these thoughts, being able to concentrate. It seems like there's numerous commentaries that give there are a few, but altogether, yeah, that you could combine
clear
all
everything
of them.
out, and then hoping that Hashem will
Accept your prayer.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So the next statement of the Mishnah was that even if a king asks how you are, about your welfare, you should not reply, lo yeshivenu. And then it mentions the third point of the Mishnah is about a snake. If a snake is wrapped around your ankle, you should not interrupt. And then the Gemara asks, how do we know this about having this kavod reish, this humility or reverence? How do we know this is an obligation, that's how you're supposed to enter prayer? How do we know that? Yeah, yes, Ben.
I think kavod reish is also seriousness.
Right. I mentioned that it's the opposite of lightheadedness.
Yeah,
That would be seriousness. Yeah, that's true. That's correct.
Seriousness of your thoughts.
But Rashi does say the word hachna'ah, which seems to add another dimension to that.
Yeah.
It's not just the seriousness, but it's also a certain hachna'ah, which could mean humility.
It could mean acceptance. Acceptance.
It could mean a physical submission. Physically, there are commentaries that translate Rashi to mean physically submission, kavod rosh, and they translate it more literal. And the common understanding, I think, is more of a feeling of of submission. But there is that explanation as well. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
yesterday you said submission of the heart.
Yeah.
Is that what that's what you're, in other words, it's not submission of.
It means both, really. There's a concept of humility, which I guess would be different than submission of the heart. And there's also a concept of submission of the heart, similar to like the tefillin. We're supposed to submit our minds and our hearts to God.
Okay.
If you really want to know the sources, there's like different commentaries. There's a Rambam, the Maimonides talks about this. I believe the Meiri talks about it. Each of them give the Rabbeinu Yoina. They each sort of like mention their a point, and I guess I should just bring it from the source. So here it mentions. Let's see. So,
Rabbi, it's easy to say all these words, but to get the depth of understanding what you're talking about, I have to ask questions. I'm sorry. I don't.
Okay, no problem. So the Pnei Yeshua says that the meaning of Rashi is that you should have shibud hamayach. You should submit your mind to Hashem alone and remove any external thoughts. That's the way the Pnei Yeshua wants to explain Rashi. That's one explanation, submitting the mind. The Or Zarua wants to explain Rashi. It means literal lowering one's head, similar to the Aruch, how he explains that you should bend your head and have kavana. You should feel pain and like a heaviness of the head. The Meiri says both of the explanations are correct. You should stand with hachnoas halev and shchias hakoima, which basically means both. You lower you have a submission of the heart and a lowering of the head. And then Maimonides says it means kavana, intent and fear. And the Bartanura, another explanation, connects Rashi with the Rambam and says they're both. It means both. You're having this fear, and you're also having this kavana, this intent. So all of these explanations are part of this Mishnah. They all fit with the Mishnah, and I think we've really gone through all of them already. So just gave you the sources now, and now we're going to go to the Gemara. So the Gemara wanted to know what is the source that the Mishnah has to obligate one to have this term kavod rosh. So the Gemara initially brings from the story of Chana. I'm sure many of you remember it. We learned it together, the story of Chana in the book of Samuel. And it says that Chana was bitter in her soul. She was feeling very pained. As you remember, the other wife had 10 kids and she did not have any. And she was very bitter. She really wanted to have a child. And the Gemara says that would be a source that a person should daven with kavod rosh. Now, what exactly is that? How is that a proof? So on a simple level, what it proves from that story is that you don't daven with a feeling of frivolousness, but instead with koived reish. In other words, it definitely doesn't. She was not, in a frivolous mood, and or a lightheaded mood, and that's what we see from that story. That's how a person should daven, the way similar to her, at least definitely not in a lightheaded mood. And the Gemara then disproves that and says, but we don't know that everyone has to follow that. That's just the way she acted. We don't know that that's the way you're obligated to. So then the Gemara brings a verse from Tehillim. Va'ani b'roiv chastecha avay veisecha, which we say in the davening, with your abundance of kindness, I come to your house and I bow before your heichel, b'yirasecha, before your fear. Now, the Gemara then disproves that and says that's not a good proof either. So that would imply that you should have fear before a person davens. I bow before you with fear. That means that during your prayer, you should have a feeling of awe, reverence, fear, and definitely not lightheadedness. So the Gemara disproves that. Does anyone remember how that gets disproven? Again, it's a story of King David saying this. The King David said this. So the Gemara says maybe just King David was that way. How do we know you're obligated to pray that way? In fact, if you look at the verse hints to the fact that this was only King David. Look at that verse. Anyone see a hint in the verse that the verse applies to David alone? It doesn't necessarily mean everyone. Does anyone see a hint in the verse? The verse is Va'ani, and I, b'roiv chastecha, with your abundance of kindness, avay veisecha, I come to your house. I bow down to the sanctuary, your holy sanctuary, with your fear, with fear of you. Anyone see over there a hint that might only apply to King David and not to everyone else?
I.
The word I. The first word. Thank you, Isaac. Va'ani, and I. That's a pretty good hint. It says I. This is what I do. Doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's obligated. Now, we know that we say it in davening. We recite this verse, so maybe it's not wrong to apply it to everyone. But King David was just saying this is what I do. And I, Va'ani. So the Gemara says maybe King David alone, he embittered he pained his soul to beg Hashem for mercy. So then the Gemara brings a verse from another verse from Tehillim, and it says, "Bow down to Hashem bahadras kodesh," which is of course a poetic term. Bow down to Hashem in hadras kodesh, in glorious holiness. And the Gemara says that, some letters are interchangeable. And so the hey and the ches come from the same source. You see, the mouth has different ways of pronouncing letters. Certain letters are pronounced because of the lips moving in a certain way. Certain letters are pronounced because the teeth or the tongue is in a certain way. So there are groups of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And the letters that come from the same place, they are interchangeable. This is a concept it's a Kabbalistic concept, but it's brought down in numerous places that letters that come from the same source are interchangeable, which means they have similar energies, Kabbalistic energies. So therefore, the Torah, when it says certain words, those letters, based on the tradition, could be interchanged as well with other letters. So here you have Hadras Kodesh, and the Hey could be changed to Cherdas, which is meaning fear. So it says, I bow down, they should bow down to us, Hashem, with chedras, cherdas, with fear of holiness, fear of God. And so
Rebbe?
these words are these letters are interchangeable, and therefore the Gemara has a understanding that that is the teaching here. Yeah, yes, Isaac.
It's not a very far stretch. I mean, typically when I first used to listen to this or hear this, switching letters around, you're playing games. Not really, because Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, was definitely more guttural spoken before it was ever written. And we have hints to this in different Kabbalahs that we all know. The Torah was created 900 generations before we were. And things like that. It is something that is always expressed gutturally. You should hand it over through demonstrations. So once you start trying to take those lofty or oral things and putting them on paper by drawing letters, you have certain rules. So it makes perfect sense that depending on how the word was pronounced originally or the sound was made, reflecting that principle or that whatever, that when you're recording it then on paper, you can group things together. If you say, if you're blowing out or if you're inhaling or if it's your lips or whatever, that definitely can provide for the difference from one letter to the other.
So Isaac is mentioning that this concept makes sense because of the fact that the origin of Hebrew is based on recital versus the way it's written. I'm not sure if that's the only, I don't know if you need to say that, and I'll tell you why. The Resh and the Daled, I believe, come from different sources of the mouth. And the reason why those are interchangeable are because they're written similarly. So it's not only because of the way it's pronounced and the way a person would move there, but there's also a concept of the way things are written are also interchangeable. And I believe it's more Kabbalistic, connected to the energy that God put in each of the letters, that there's a connection between these type of letters, either because they're written that way, because they're pronounced that way. I don't know if it has to do, you don't need to emphasize that, but it's a good, interesting point, Isaac. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not sure if you need to. Did you want to say something, Isaac? Isaac, did you want to?
All I want was, I agree with you. I wasn't saying exclusively. I'm saying originally, when I first started learning this, I'm going, oh, come on, what kind of games are we playing? And then it all makes sense. The same thing you're saying, the Resh and the Dalet, and all the different Kabbalistic things about it. And it is all a unified whole. We're not talking about different things. Everything weaves into everything else.
Right.
So that doesn't know what you would call it. Both of these are Torah.
Right, for sure. Well, the way I see it is when Hashem said this statement, Hashem, the intent was to have numerous explanations of this verse. And that was one of them. These are one of the explanations with intent. It's not that we're coming along, rabbis are saying, oh, we can now interchange things and make up laws. This was part of the intent when God said certain statements. There's the gematria, which is another way of calculating that Hashem had in mind, the 600,000 meanings of every verse. Every verse has different meanings. There's, of course, 70, Shivim Panim LaTorah, there's 70, but each verse has really numerous understandings, and these are all part of what God intended with the Torah. So I think that just adds a little point to how you can interchange things. Yes, Susan.
Okay, when you say the letters that come from the same source are interchangeable, are you saying the physically the way a letter looks can be
no in the mouth? There's letters that come from the throat from the lips, from the tongue. Each
Oh my
part of the
gosh,
mouth
okay.
pronounces it.
That was
And that would
unclear
be-
what you were saying. Okay.
And what that means is that that's what the rabbis had traditions, that this word is meant to also mean, if it was interchanged, it would mean that way. In other words, we have traditions that certain words are meant to be explained in this form and in another form. There's also a concept of gematria, which means numerical value, that when it says one thing, it also means the same numerical value if we have a tradition in that, there could be that type of interchangeable option as well. So I'm just sharing with you here because this example is just one of many kinds of the traditions of interchanging letters, which is all, of course, rooted in Hashem's original plan. It's all part of Hashem's saying the Torah, teaching the Torah, was dictating the Torah, was all of these interchangeable letters or numerical value. They're all part of the Torah. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say, but it's written Behadrat Kodesh. Would you say Becherdat Kodesh?
You're wondering about the resh and the dalet being switched around?
No, the first letter, the hey and the chet.
Yeah.
When you say Behadrat Kodesh, it means beautiful Kodesh, right?
Yeah.
And Herdat Kodesh is the fear of Kodesh.
Yeah.
What is fear of Kodesh?
It means fear of Hashem. Who's
fear
Kodesh?
Of Hashem is okay, but Kodesh didn't fit for me. I don't know. Herdat Kodesh.
Is it Kodesh or Kaddish that Ben is talking about?
It's the same root. It's the same root.
Same root?
Yeah, but it means holiness. Who's the ultimate holy one?
Yeah,
Ata Kadosh. What do we say in the davening? Ata Kadosh. You are Kadosh. Okay. Now, the Gemara continued and said that maybe the verse doesn't mean Cherdas, maybe it means Hadras Kodesh. And therefore the Gemara says, and the Gemara says, we find one of the rabbis translated it literally, Hadras, not Cherdas, and he actually would put on special clothing before he davened. And the Gemara therefore says that we have a different verse. And this verse is very clear. Ivdu es Hashem b'yira. Serve Hashem with fear, and that is the final conclusion of the Gemara, that you see clearly you got to serve Hashem with fear. When you serving Hashem implies not only doing the service in the Beis Hamikdash, but it's also our prayer, which is in place of the Avodah. You do that with fear, and that is how a person should daven. So according to that, we have a proof to our Mishnah, and we understand that that is the source. And the Chassidim Harishonim, of course, took this to the extent that they would spend a full hour, and others maybe would just make sure to have a feeling of fear.
Is trembling.
Trembling. Thank you.
Trembling, which is fear,
Which is fear. Okay. And then, yes, Moshe.
Yirah Shamayim.
Yirah Shamayim. Okay.
Yirah Shamayim. Okay.
Well, that's a good word. Now the Gemara concluded, and the Gemara says, what's the concluding part of that verse? It says, "V'gilu bera'ada," and rejoice with trembling. So the Gemara wants to know, okay, what does that mean? In other words, which one is it? So the Gemara says that even when you have Gila, when you have rejoicing, you should also have trembling. And it gave stories here. And these stories were proof that even when you have rejoicing, that if you rejoice too much, you really have to be careful. It should be tempered with element of fear of Hashem. And the first story was with Abaye sitting before Rabbah. And many of the commentaries, even though the wording implies, from the wording, it implies that Abaye was sitting before Rabbah and he saw him that he was rejoicing too much. The literal way of reading the Gemara would mean that Abaye saw that Rabbah was rejoicing too much, but the commentaries don't translate it that way. Not all of them. One of the commentaries, Rabbeinu Yoina and the Ritva, two commentaries translated that it's the opposite. It's really Rabbah, which is not the literal reading of it, but that's the way they translate it. That's really the opposite. That it's Rabbah saw that Abaye was rejoicing too much, and he told him Begilu b'ra'adaksim. And I think the reason why they translate it that way is because it wouldn't be respectful for Abaye to tell his Rebbe, you're not allowed to do this. Oh, it says Gila Barada. It's sort of a very strong statement, and it makes more sense that it's the Rebbe telling the student. It's the teacher telling the student Vigilu Baradaksiv, and therefore, actually, this is. This point is mentioned in one of the commentaries that it seems very very rude for a student to tell his teacher that way, and therefore it's the teacher telling the student, and then you have the next Gemara. The next story is Reb Yirmiyah sitting before Reb Zera, and here he doesn't say such a strong statement. He says, doesn't it say, he was sitting before Reb Zera, Reb Yirmiyah was sitting before Reb Zera. He saw that he was rejoicing too much. So he said, that it says, which is also a statement emphasizing that it's not appropriate to be so joyous. And he said, I was wearing tefillin, and because of that, obviously, either the tefillin will have an impact on me that I'm not going to become overly lightheaded, or that the fact that the tefillin is on me, I'm going to, of course, my feeling, I have this feeling of Hashem being in charge. My master is, I have a subservience to him, and I am not rejoicing too much. And then the Gemara mentioned the story, but I see my time is up. It mentioned the story about a wedding that they were rejoicing too much, and one of the rabbis broke glass, a very expensive glass, a kais shel v'chuches levana, white. It's called white glass. I wonder if that's what crystal is. Maybe that's crystal. And I have to see if the Steinsaltz maybe mentions what this really is, because it's considered a very expensive type of glass. And the Gemara said it was worth like 400 zuz, which I guess is a lot of money. It says everyone became like depressed, or they had a sad feeling, so they didn't overdo their rejoicing, which could have led. And what's the reason for this? That they don't want to lead to any prikas oil, a feeling of removing the yoke of heaven, or it would possibly, it's not necessary. That's one explanation. Another explanation is that if they rejoice too much, it would lead them to other types of pleasures, and they may transgress. So that is the two reasons why a person shouldn't rejoice too much. Is either they will remove the yoke of heaven if they become too lightheaded, or it would cause them to indulge into other pleasure. They're enjoying things so much they'll indulge in other pleasures, and possibly sin or forget about Hashem. Okay. We're going to conclude here. I want to wish you all a very good Shabbos, and If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes, Moshe.
before you leave, 5 essays, is this, and what is this with the Kiddush? The add something in addition to that? I'm going by the new policy.
Yeah. So just each week try to pick the class that you like the most, and write a little write a little insight that came to your mind, that about the class, maybe a question or a thought, or look on the internet and find something that discusses it, somewhere that discusses this concept. And as long as it's an authentic website and something that adds a little something that you enjoyed when you read, that would be nice to add, to write a little essay about it. So try to find something, or just think of a good question or a good answer, or a good thought, or story that connects to it, but something added. In other words, not just a review of the class.
I understand.
Doesn't have to be huge. Doesn't have to be a major innovation, but just the small point that wasn't mentioned. Maybe you'll find another commentary that I didn't mention. There's numerous websites that discuss prayer, Jewish prayer. Maybe you'll find something that adds something, something nicer. Okay. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Sei gesund.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos, everybody. Bye,
Thank you.